It's wonderful. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. By showing up tonight, you are amplifying your town's voice together with what could be 100 other towns across New Hampshire. Tonight is about strategy. We're not here to debate the issues themselves. We're here to focus on how to move citizen petition warrant articles to a yes vote. Our goal is simple, and that's to help you succeed. We'll share what works at town meetings, at SB2 deliberative sessions, and for their ballot, and in the voter education that leads up to them. Excuse me. What we know after watching this play out town after town is that clarity and preparation, not improvisation, are what gets us over the line. That's why this approach is designed to be practical, focused, and winnable. A quick housekeeping note, please hold questions until the end of the presentation. If you'd like, you can drop them into the chat as we go. We'll bank them and come back to them at the end of the program. And one important reminder, we are a team of volunteers. We don't have all the answers, and we are not offering legal advice. Town-specific questions are best answered by your moderator, town administrator, or town clerk. Before we get into tactics, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about why these local yes votes matter so much, both in your town and ultimately statewide. Next slide, please. One town matters, but many towns speaking together are impossible to dismiss. Town meeting votes and SB2 deliberate ballots create a voter-backed mandate, stronger than press releases or lobbying. It is the most credible form of public input we have. And by voting yes, your town is also contributing to clear messaging for candidates as they campaign toward the November elections. Frankly, it will now be on the record. This is how local democracy begins to shape state policy. So let's get started on the specific tactics for moving each of the 5 warrant articles to a yes vote across the state. Next, please, Katie. For each of the 5 warrant articles, we know that school voucher programs, or EFAs, state mandates, specifically on school budget caps, protecting the taxpayer, fair voting districts, and local control, partisan local races, will cover 3 things: what a yes vote means, and then common questions or pushback, and how to respond to those pushbacks. A few important framing notes before we begin. First of all, we're not covering every possible opposition argument, only the key reoccurring ones. The goal is not to win debates or argue. The goal is to reassure undecided voters and move the room to a clear, confident yes. When responding to pushbacks, keep responses factual, brief, and values-based. And don't repeat the opposition's framing, redirect. And you'll see suggested redirect language for each of the issues as we go through the slides. You're welcome to take notes, but all this material will also be in the toolkit resources and in a follow-up email. And one final note, this effort remains strategic, so please be mindful about where and with whom you share these tactics. We'll spend about 4 minutes on each article, 2 minutes on the case for a yes vote, and 2 minutes on handling pushback and responses to those pushbacks. I'd like to now introduce Dave Trumbull from the Ware Democratic Committee, the Hillsborough County Democratic Committee, and a state Senate candidate for Senate District 8, who will begin with school vouchers and the EFAs, the #1 warrant being submitted across the state.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Dave Trumbull, and we're going to go through each of the 5 warrant articles one at a time. We're starting with 2 articles dealing with education topics, and we are pleased to have Nancy Glynn, a co-senior director of Moms Rising in New Hampshire, as our guest to help us with these 2 education articles. So Nancy, if you're here, can you please unmute and join?
Absolutely. Thank you, David, for introducing me. Again, my name is Nancy Glenn. I'm co-senior director for Moms Rising here in New Hampshire, but also I am a select board member, the Sutton representative on the Kearsarge School Board, as well as the chair of my local library board of trustees. So these topics are specifically I'm very passionate about. So, David, I think you're going to go forward and read the first article or the first.
Okay. Yep. We'll start with the first article, which is EFAs/vouchers. The article calls for strengthening of accountability in terms of both financial reporting and educational standards comparable to public schools to protect the local taxpayers and a renewed commitment to strong, well-funded public schools. So Nancy, if you have a couple minutes, would you start with giving us what do you think are the best arguments in favor of this article?
I think one of the pieces here that's really important to lift up is this program is already wildly unpopular. There have been a lot of local news sources that have been covering things like the lack of accountability on this. Due to that lack of accountability, we have severely overspent on the state side in regards to this issue. So that's usually one of the big ones that folks are usually paying close attention to is how much money we've actually spent. But even more so, one of the other arguments that has been I've seen winning quite a bit is in regards to um, again, not only is it not accountable, but you're taking money out of public schools. Originally, this entire piece of legislation was supposed to be geared towards low-income families being able to gain access to what they call school choice. To be very clear, we already have a lot of school choice options available for folks that, might not, that a lot of people on the ground might not be fully aware of because honestly, if you don't know, unfortunately, if you don't know some of these pieces, then you don't know that there are options for students to be able to have some level of school choice leaving their school district to go into another, especially under hardship reasons. So that's one thing. But I've also found, again, that lack of accountability and knowing that this program was supposed to be for low income families and is now, we do have data showing that that is not the case. That out of the 10,000, that we only saw like a small percentage of folks out of this 10,000 people that are being able to access EFAs who actually left the public school system to go into the private school system. So, yes, I see in the chat, In-Depth has done great reporting on the costs and the failings of EFAs. Another big argument that I've seen too is where is the money going? What are folks able to actually spend their education freedom account funds on? And families can spend it on, that private school tuition, which we often hear about. They can also spend it on tutors. What they're calling homeschool curricula and supplies, as well as online classes or courses. But again, because there is not accurate accountability there, we have seen just most recently in the last week or so some more data that's come out to show where EFA funds are actually going, and we're seeing a lot of it going towards things like ski lessons, things like Amazon. I know there's a quite a bit of money that was going towards purchases off of Amazon. So that's one of the other things that I found has been, an argument that I've been able to use. And, acknowledging that, you know, even though public schools are losing funding, the costs stay the same. In our deliberative session in Kearsarge that we had a wonderful my superintendent had a wonderful example as to, how even if you have less students coming in or anything like that, the cost to be able to heat or light the building stays the same. So if you're taking money out of public schools, the costs are still there. So that's another big piece another argument that I've seen that has worked really well. So I see in the chat, somebody had asked me about what some of those choices already exist without EFAs. So yes, so you can, so families can go to their local school system and request for them to be placed somewhere else. Again, there are a list of reasons as to why hardship tends to be one of the bigger ones that I see that result in something called an out-of-district placement. Out-of-district placements tend to be very expensive. I'm not going to lie on that front because they are very expensive, but there are options there for families to be able to make a case to their local school district to be able to have an option to go to another school, if that helps to answer that question.
Awesome. Nancy, that is like a very thorough, complete takedown of the EFA program. Just ask you one question. If someone in the audience on the other side of this at a deliberative might say, well, our public schools are failing, we need competition, how would you answer that question?
So honestly, and this is funny because whenever I hear this, public schools are failing, they need competition. Public schools are not failing. If you actually take a look at, how New Hampshire schools are doing overall, we are actually still very much high up there. What we are failing at, though, is how we fund our education system. So, and this is my Nancy Glenn personal response to this sometimes is, okay, we don't adequately fund education already. Before we can say that, we need competition, that public schools are failing, why don't we actually adequately fund it in the way that it's supposed to before we can make that judgment? We also don't have accurate data across the board to be able to show public schools are failing. And if we're going off of proficiency scores, just that alone is not a way to be able to look at a measurement of how well a public school is doing and how it's not, especially if you take a look at how they do proficiency scores and how it's very much based off of how that student does on a singular day and not necessarily related to the growth that the student is making throughout a time period that they're in public schools.
Okay.
So,
And go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
I was going to say one more question on this EFAs is, can you talk a little bit about how New Hampshire funds most of its education at the local level and how the state is doing or not doing its job?
So, 70% of 70% of our public schools are paid for by our local property taxes, which is why we rank number 50 in the state as to how we fund public schools. Right now, the way that the state is calculated is a cost per pupil formula, and they have been doing about little over $4,000 per pupil is how much the state will pay out. However, we have seen multiple lawsuits now come through that have shown that that number is unconstitutional, especially when the average cost per pupil for a district is around $21,000, $22,000 per student. So they had said that you have to raise that up to a minimum of a little over 7,000, I think 7,500 around that number is what we're supposed to be bringing in per student from the state. I know, and that's adequately funded due to the Conval lawsuits and that we've seen. We know that that doesn't actually touch that $21,000 number, or if we're in districts where that cost per pupil is a lot higher. So that's just one step in the direction of being able to adequately fund public schools, but also fully acknowledging that, that doesn't touch, but also taking a look at how much money would actually come back to your district. I know that in the Kearsarge district, if they brought that cost per pupil from the state from 4,000 up to that $7,000 mark, we would be looking at an additional $3.5 million that would be coming back to our town or back to our district to be able to use. To put it on a scale for folks to get there, that is more than the entire that was more than the entire proposed budget of one of our elementary schools in my district. And then some. Our proposed budget for one of our elementary schools was 2.9 million. So that would have actually not only covered the full proposed budget for that elementary school, but then it also would have been able to fund even more opportunities and more things that our students could be losing out on because of that lack of funding coming into our district.
That's good. Thanks. And one last thing. Well, no, I think we better move on. That was good. Let's go to our second warrant article, and we have questions and answers. We'll do some more of that at the end, but I want to make sure we have enough time to get through all of there's a number of speakers here. The second one is another educated article. It's about state mandated budget caps. So there's a lot of rolling over of these issues here. And this article calls for a local control rather than a state mandated budget cap at like 3% per year, and giving towns greater flexibility. So what do you think is the best argument in favor of no state mandated budget cap?
Well, I think it's really important to look at, why budget caps are a problem to begin with. And some of the big ones that I point out there are that, the costs rise faster than what the caps are. School districts, they have to pay for supportive or special education services, transportation, health insurance, utilities, and teacher salaries. These are required costs that increase every year. And often it happens much faster than inflation. Cuts to programs and opportunities are another problem from budget caps. When required costs rise, but the budget can't, then districts are forced to cut from the only areas that they have left. So that's where you start to see sports, arts, music and theater, some of the AP classes, some of the clubs and extracurriculars, classroom supplies, and then teacher positions as well, which can often lead to larger class sizes. Another problem that we have with budget caps is the loss of local control. Budget caps replace local decision making with like a one size fit all kind of rule. Even when voters want to support their schools, a cap can block them. Staffing challenges. Districts struggle to hire new teachers. They keep experienced staff in order to be able to keep experienced staff and maintain programs that students rely on. This leads to burnout, turnover, and fewer adults in the building. We already know that our staff within our schools are pretty tired as it is with everything that they're already managing. So adding a budget cap on top of it is not exactly a great way to be able to support your public school. And increases in contracted services, which end up being more expensive than those direct hires. A lot of school districts will often contract with, an outside entity for their paraprofessional services, and we end up spending a significant more amount of money on having that contract versus if we just had somebody hired within the school. The other thing too that's really important is what do budget caps actually mean for the students? I know that we talk a lot about funding. We talk a lot about, all of the adult forward type things, especially in regards to our taxes. But what does this mean for students? You heard me kind of cover a little bit about, what could be affected, like class sizes, that access to arts and music, that AP honors and advanced coursework, cutting sports and extracurriculars, including cutting transportation to some of those sports and extracurriculars if you have a district that's still able to do that right now. Updated technology is another piece. We know that the world's constantly moving and that technology is also being updated, but also allows for our students to have a lot more opportunities to, the big world that's out there that's going to be waiting for them, that's rapidly just moving. And then the big one, which is safe and well-maintained buildings. The buildings are going to be there. The cost of the boiler is still going to be there. If you have budget caps that are put on there, then a lot of times that actually prevents local schools from being able to even address some of those challenges without having to take a look at, again, cutting staff, looking at class sizes and things like that. So I guess the bottom line that I would say was budget caps take away local control. They don't account for rising costs like special supportive education or transportation. They lead to cuts in programs that often a lot of our students love. Voters across New Hampshire have rejected budget caps again and again. And our schools, they need more flexibility and not as many limits that are putting in there.
Nancy, that's awesome. That covers all of the arguments for it. I think you answered all of the possible arguments against as well there. Thank you so much, Nancy and Moms Rising, for all of the good work you do on education. And I know a lot of other issues like childcare, your group is also heavily involved in.
Thank you, David. Happy to help anytime.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to move on to Article number 3 now, and that is protecting the taxpayer downshifting. And I wish we had someone like Nancy to carry on with us, but I have some notes. I'll just work through this kind of quickly for each of the remaining 3 articles. This downshifting article was the second most popular amongst all of the towns. The EFA one was the first one, and downshifting was second most popular, then the budget cap. So clearly money's on people's minds. The point of this article and all of the articles, the very first thing in each of them is a value statement, a positive statement of what we stand for. We want that to be the emphasis at the hearings is this is what we stand for, not what we stand against. So the statement is that New Hampshire thrives when state funding supports local communities. And this happens in 2 ways. First is the state needs to have adequate revenues. Otherwise, the local property taxpayer has to pick up the bill. And 2 is we want the state to stop downshifting their obligations. So how did we get to this situation? The state is in a deficit right now, like $20 million in the hole. In the years, we still have a lot to go. Uh, Basically, there was cuts in taxes that are not paid by the average taxpayer, but cuts in taxes that are paid by people who are wealthy or large corporations. So first was eliminating the interest and dividends tax, which was almost $200 million a year in revenue. And that tax has been around since the early 1900s, and it just went away that quickly. And most all of that money is paid for by people who have a lot of passive investment income. And then the other thing was cuts to the business profits tax and the business enterprise taxes. Over the last 10 years, that's cost the state over $1 billion in lost revenue. And that is according to a really good report from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, which you can find online. And most of those taxes are paid for by multinational corporations, not estate corporations. So what happens is that the state has been downshifting over the last 20 years costs on nonstop basis to the local and county governments. For example, pensions. Originally, the state agreed to pay 35% of pensions for public workers, and they haven't been doing that. They're shifting tens of millions in obligations down the county nursing homes. Back in 1998, the state share of the Medicaid was all of it. Now the counties are paying half of the state share. So that's another expense that got downshifted. Special education. The state's supposed to be paying for that under the Conval lawsuit, the Claremont lawsuit, the state constitution, and yet they only pay 11% of special ed. Just think about that. And the feds pay 5%. So the towns are paying 85% of a bill that the state's supposed to be paying. And special ed in total for the state amounts to about $900 million across the state. So these are examples that you can use at your deliberative session of downshift costs. And the objection that we might hear is, well, gee, does this mean you want an income tax? And no, it doesn't. It means that we're asking that the taxes that were cut or eliminated be restored, taxes on corporations and wealthier individuals. And what we do want, again, back to something positive, is we want investment in human services. We want investment in our communities. And that's the point of the downshifting warrant article. We'll move on to the next one. It's the Fair Districts, Voting Districts article. And this calls for an independent redistricting commission. The value statement is that elections should reflect the will of the voters and that they should be fair and transparent. And this warrant article asks that we adopt an independent redistricting commission. And the best example of that and what it would look like in practice, there's a bill that's coming up for hearing this week on Tuesday. It's House Bill 1487 from Representative Connie Lane from Concord. And it is a really thorough proposal on what an independent redistricting commission would look like. A couple notes in favor of this that you can say is, one, it's very popular with the people. This article was run back in the 2020 and over 50 towns in New Hampshire approved of it. It was passed as a bill and a law by the House and the Senate and then vetoed by Governor Sununu. Why did he veto it? Because he wanted a gerrymandered legislature, a state legislature that would do whatever he wanted them to do. He did not approve of the gerrymandering for the congressional race because he wasn't that concerned about the federal races, but he really wanted a legislature that would do what he wanted. And the state Senate in particular is extremely gerrymandered, as are the executive council. The other argument in favor of this bill is that it assures equal representation for all voters. The voters should be picking their politicians and their representatives, not the other way around. Objections that you might hear at this would be, one, that it will take power away from elected officials. And our answer to that is no, it actually doesn't. This commission would not have the final word on this. The way it's written in this bill and the way it would have to be in New Hampshire is that the commission would propose a redistricting model that would then have to be approved by the legislature and the governor. But this, as I was saying earlier, Connie Lane's bill, Representative Lane's bill, is very thorough. It's got a long process where dozens of people get nominated for this. Then through a system, it breaks down to about 9 people in the end, balanced between Democrats, Republicans, and undeclareds. They can't be politicians, and there will be public forums about it. So it's a very good proposal. This kind of system has been done in other states. There's at least 7 other states that have it. It's been found constitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it would build trust in our elections. People have lost faith in their representatives fairly districts, drawn districts would restore people's faith. So the arguments for is that it's popular, it's equal representation, and that there's a very good plan in place that could be adopted that would really work. And the last of the 5 articles is self-governance or local control. The value statement is that local voices best know local needs. And the 2 issues here are, one is partisan local elections, and 2, allowing local boards to do their work. And this article is particularly in response to 2 bills that are working their way through or came out of the legislature. The arguments for is that local elections are by statute nonpartisan elections. There's no barriers between you, the voter, or the resident of the town, and the people who serve on these boards. You can talk with them, you can go to the meetings. It's very much more approachable than it is at the level of state government. And local boards and local offices, we want competent people, not people who have a partisan agenda, but just people who will put whatever task they're on, whether it's a school board or a select board or the town clerk. These folks are there to do a good job to represent the town, not to represent a state political interest. And also these boards are there to should have the authority to act on behalf of the town to decide if the town wants to participate in some state program. For example, there's a push for consolidating school districts. Rather than forcing that on towns, local school boards should be able to decide for themselves if they want to voluntarily participate in that. The argument against this is that party labels are good because it's information that voters should know and it will bring about more turnout. And against that, here's a few things you can say. Well, first, one thing is that partisan labels actually will discourage undeclared and independent people from voting, and that's the largest voting group in New Hampshire. 40% of our voters are registered undeclared. Also, interestingly, it would mean that federal employees could not run for a local office due to the Hatch Act. And thank you to Melanie Levesque for pointing that out the other night as we prepared for this. Also, there was a great concern that a state political agenda will eventually lead to a state takeover of local government. And this is going to be the end of local control as we know it. The goal of these bills is really not just to push a partisan agenda, but to consolidate power in the hands of certain people who will want to run the state and want to run the towns as well. So that kind of gets us through the 5 articles. And now we're going to get into some other things. I'm going to turn you over to Leslie McGregor, who's the treasurer for the Grantham Town Democratic Committee. And Leslie's going to take over and talk about voters and education. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. That was a great rundown. And I'm going to talk about initially outreach tools and materials. And there's a number of those, some of which we've created and some of which town activists already know about. First of all, you can certainly write a letter to the editor about what's going to happen in your town meeting. And we do have a media summary that can be used to facilitate that, as well as post things on community Facebook groups. And mobilizing your committee members is something that you would do through conversations and sharing the handout. There's a myriad ways that you could talk with people in your community, depending on how you interact with them. There's always the suggestion of encountering people at the transfer station in your town, which seems to be a common place that you might have an opportunity to have conversations. But this would be relevant for your deliberative session or the town meeting. Also, for many of us, we are involved with rallies and protests, and I've been walking around with a clipboard at rallies that I've been to, collecting signatures for the citizen petition or warrant article that we're putting on the Grantham town meeting this year. It's a really great way to get people to collect signatures. So the Warrant Works New Hampshire tools includes the handouts, which give some specifics on why an article is something that one should support. It's a good idea to have that handout, to share it with anybody that you're talking with or collecting a signature from. They can look at it, reflect on it, and share it with anybody else in their community that it builds conversation. And then we also have a picture, as you can see on the slide, of a couple of mock-ups of yard signs that you could consider putting together, but they have to be printed by hand, or if you pay for them, there has to be some indication that they were paid for by some entity based on the RSA that we talked about earlier this weekend. So they can be useful, but you have to fulfill some. You have to jump through some hoops to make sure you're abiding by the rules. The next is about your team. Let's see. Sorry, here we go. So back to public outreach, voter education, went through that. So then the next thing is your team, about your team and comprising your team. A big piece is not having any surprises. So just to put this in context, last year in Grantham, a very small town in New Hampshire, I was part of a group that put forth a warrant article on vouchers, education vouchers, and I had no experience to do this, neither did anybody in my group, and we passed it. So we're going to go through a number of steps, but I don't want anybody to feel intimidated that this is too complicated, because we did it last year and we weren't particularly savvy. But first order of business is to make sure you talk to your select board or whatever governing board is relevant. Maybe it's the school board. The moderator, in my case, was a really valuable resource and was able to tell me about the process for how we would do this. Town administrator, obviously, and the supervisor of the checklist, somebody else in her town found that person to be particularly helpful, and the town clerk. It can vary from town to town who is the most helpful to you. And obviously, some members of these town leadership might be more or less interested in supporting you. So that's something that you'll have to sort of suss out as you go. There are processes that happen at deliberative sessions and town meetings that follow Robert's rules that are important for you to understand. You could look up Robert's rules and have a sense of how this all works, but your moderator is likely to be able to do some hand-holding that makes that a little easier too. But there's things like making a motion, which is a formal proposal, and that begins the discussion on the debate. Once it's out there, there's calling the question, which is a motion to end the debate and move it directly to a vote, which may be sooner than you want it to be, before you've had all your arguments put out there. That's something to keep in mind. And then there's something called a motion to pass over, which is similar to no discussion. There are amendments that could happen, and they could be things that you want to support. We are asking that amendments, even if they are supportive of your general petition, they don't significantly alter the language of the petition, because we want to be able to make representation about the uniformity of the statements coming from different towns. And certainly you'd want to look for amendments that are that undermine what you're trying to accomplish. So understand that there are some guidelines we can give you, some generalizations that we can make, but there are specifics and a culture associated with your town that you'll have to figure out Also, the pre-meeting checklist. Katie, can you post that?
Yes, I put it in the chat already.
Okay, so the pre-meeting checklist is, I mean, based on, I did this last year, so I can tell you this pre-meeting checklist is really helpful. It's probably more detailed than a lot of towns need, but it really reduces the chance that you're going to run into something that that really undermines that throws a wrench into the works. Okay, so the next thing is on game day. You do need to know in your team who's going to do what. There needs to be somebody on the team that does an overview of the arguments. That's the first person that should speak. That person can use the slide deck that we created, or that can be modified to be specific to your town. And so the importance of that is really critical, because if somebody calls a question or tables a question or wants the debate to end soon, at least somebody has gotten in there to do a general overview. And then team members need to be able to say, to pick a specific talking point and own it and be able to talk about it as a means of supporting the petition. So you can use handouts at the time of the meeting to hand out as people come in some way. The slides, as I mentioned, can be used. If they aren't used, somebody in your team needs to make sure they're in the front of the line to speak, to do the overview the way I just described. And you do need to be ready for the counterpoints as Dave lined out and how you will respond to that. And you do need to be ready to prepare for the procedural motions that I've talked about. So it's really good to say who's going to be responsible for what. Okay, so there's another thing about you have to line up to speak at the microphone. Make sure you don't give up your place in line. It's been known that people who seem to think they have authority will bump people out of line. Don't let that happen. And be sure you're ready to talk about amendments, as I've discussed. You need to look and see if a positive amendment is put forth. Is it something that alters the meaning of the petition more than you'd like? Then you need to stand up against it. And if it's undermining what you're trying to do, you certainly need to do that. And I think that is all I need to do there. And I will turn it over to Terry Harkins.
Actually, it now goes to Katie, I believe. Thank you, Leslie.
I'm turning it over to you, Carol. Sorry.
Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Cottrell. I'm chair of the Hillsborough County Democrats and also co-chair of the Bedford Democrats. And thank you for the team for laying out, getting to the deliberative session or town meeting and public hearing and what you can do. I want to talk about briefly what happens after the town meeting or deliberative session and the vote. Winning the vote is not the last step. Follow-up ensures that the vote has real impacts. We are going to ask you to report your results to Warren's Work New Hampshire. I have linked, and when you get a copy of this via email, you'll be able to click on that link in the slide deck, and we can share it out separately. But it's a post-voting form that we ask that you fill out. This step allows us to help legislators know the results and make the best use of your efforts. It makes us aware of how things went in your town, and the info will be useful for a WWNH library, as well as analysis and reports, because this is a multi-year effort, and we can learn from this one going forward. We also ask that you follow up with your local election team. If your warrant passes, verify that a letter has been sent to legislators, as is part of the warrant article itself. Check back in a couple of weeks to verify a letter has been sent as indicated and within the designated time period. If you could obtain a copy of that letter and send it to us, that would be very helpful. Letters from across the state will be compiled into useful packets for our legislators to use as quickly as possible. We also want you to celebrate. Not only can it be fun, obviously, but it helps build your team and deepen connections for your next project or initiative. And lastly, we do plan to gather all this information and issue a report. Give us a little time after the elections. Plus, there's some towns that don't do March, they do April and May. But we want to put out a report about a voter-backed mandate from New Hampshire towns to synthesize all this and kind of market it. So thank you for that. I'm going to kick it over to Carol Schreck. Carol sits with me on the Hillsborough County Democrats. She's also the vice chair of the Brookline Democrats. She's been leading this team of 8 volunteers and doing a fantastic job. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Katie. Now it's question and answer, and we're going to ask Megan, Representative Murray, to help us sort of gather what some of those questions are. Megan, if you want to unmute yourself, if you can, or and help us if there's any kind of where the questions, again, we aren't going to be speaking to the issues specifically, but we will answer questions. So, Megan?
Yes, thanks, Carol. I think there was a question down here about roughly how many towns have already started submitting warrant articles, and if you could speak to that or plan on participating.
Well, we've had over 100 towns express interest by filling out those interest forms. So that's very positive. That's encouraging, because we have to remember many of the municipalities around the state are actually cities, so they wouldn't be participating in this in the town level. The SB2 towns just had their deadline on the 13th. We haven't received all the information yet, which is why it's so important, please, to fill out the participation forms, because I could give a better answer for that. But we're very optimistic. There's 100, as I mentioned, 100 towns that are interested and that are participating from the standpoint of considering it. I don't know how many of those we will actually be submitting, but every day we get a different town that says, okay, I'm in. So if you're out there and you haven't submitted, or you haven't let us know that you intend to submit, please do let us know so we can track that a little bit better. But there's quite a few.
Interesting. Also, Jim Bednar mentions that in one town, he had just heard that a local community had 2 no votes out of the town meeting because they weren't sure that they felt the topic was appropriate for town meeting warrants. And so did we have any thoughts on that as a response to the votes in that community?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. I mean, the select board didn't want to put it on the warrant article because the deliberatives, the SB2, they're going for deliberatives. Well, the first ones start the 31st of the month, and it goes into the first week of February. And the SB2 towns, or excuse me, the regular towns don't have their deadline until February 3rd. So I don't know what the no votes were. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I don't quite understand the question.
Can I speak? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Hi, Jim.
Hi, I'm
It's
from
Jim.
Springfield. I'm sorry, I haven't figured out how to say where I'm from. But I was referring to the last time we did the voucher warrant, and it was at the town meeting, and it passed, but the 2 no votes were both former moderators in saying that it was not appropriate, that kind of topic, to bring to the town meeting. And I just didn't know how to deal with that, because I would really like to get their support, because they're very influential in the town.
So they thought it should have been on the school ballot? Because
Yeah,
that's one of the questions that's come up in the past. Should like the voucher be on the schools, or should it be on the town? And there's different theories on that. I know Katie's got a perspective on it, and it really comes down to where will it get the most votes in your town? Where's it going to get the most support? One could argue it should be on the town ballot because it is, tax related. On the other hand, it's the school board that manages their budget. So I think it really comes down to what's going to work in your town specifically.
And Jim,
Yes.
Katie, or excuse me, Carol, if I can. Also, there are some towns where the school is separate from the town budget. So I think it really does depend on each unique town. So there is another question here from Regina Conrad, just looking for the toolbox and the toolkit, and just curious as to where she could find that.
1 second, please. Dave, you have your hand up about that question?
Yes, back to Jim's question. The broader question is, are non-financial topics okay to run as warrant articles? And these moderators felt it wasn't appropriate in general, whether it was school board or town board. And I think one thing we could say is the New Hampshire Supreme Court has had a number of cases on this, and they've said there is no right or wrong way to word these things, and they don't want to let technicalities get in the way of the people having their opinions brought up and their questions raised. And there is a state statute that allows people to bring petitions. So I think the argument against the moderator is we don't do it all the time, but as people, we have the right to do this in our state statutes. State Supreme Court have said so. But one thing we learned doing this is talking to people from all over. Every town is different on this. Like what the wording that works in one town would be found unacceptable to a moderator or a lawyer in another town, and what they want would be different in a third town. So there isn't really a right or a wrong way, but people should have the right to petition. It's a strong right. So.
Which is why, thank you, Dave, which is why it's so important to check with your local town. And the other way you can do that, you can look at your past annual reports. And in the past annual reports, it gives you how your particular town likes to do the language. Lori, you have a question?
Oh, sorry, Carol.
I have actually more of a comment. So
Okay.
as long as your petition is formatted properly and the signatures are all verified, you have every right to present it to your selectmen for approval to the ballot. But I guess especially with the education funding ones, I would make the case that is the taxpayers' property tax that is going to the state and is coming back at you, whether it's in the form of the statewide education property tax that's being sent to you, that is not part of your school budget, that's part of your tax bill. So this is part of your tax bill. It's whether it's being allocated to school or whether it's part of your municipal contribution to the state. Either way, it is part of your property tax bill. So it need not be a school budget issue, because it's the select board that will be setting your tax rate based on what the state is telling you your property tax has to cover in the way of statewide education.
Thank
Great.
you, Lori. Very
Thank
good
you.
points. Yeah.
And then Carol, going back to the questions in the queue, Regina Conrad is just looking for that toolkit and asking if she missed it somehow and how she can get it. She is a town committee member in Lineborough.
Regina, if you would, Warrants Work New Hampshire NH at Gmail. If you fill, the first thing you need to do, and anyone else here, if you want to share any of this or have anyone else on your committees participate, we need to get the interest form from them. And we need that because that's how we capture the contacts. That's how we sort of vet what's going on and who's doing what. And from that, everyone will get the information and all the Zooms and all the correspondence from us. So, Regina, please just reach out to us again. In some cases, there's been issues with, and this might be the case with you, Regina, I'm just trying to think back. Google does not play well with Comcast.net or Verizon.net. So they really want to have a Google account. So I think there are workarounds with that. I'm not the one that's really the expert on that. But Regina, if that is the issue, we can certainly try to help you with that.
Yeah, Regina, in her case, she did fill it out, and Terry.
Thank you.
gonna check it
Actually,
out.
Terry just wrote me and said that she will send me the stuff because I have filled out the form.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. I also see David Bodman has a question about citations on state law court decisions, ... for petitions. I'm not entirely sure what the ask there is. If you want me to speak briefly, I can, Carol, just on the political calendar that the Secretary of State sets out regarding the time frame for filing citizens petition warrant articles. But David, I think David Trumbull responded to you, David Bodman, in the chat about RSA 39.3.
And David, if you want to, rephrase the question so we can give you a better answer if that wasn't good enough. Lori, did you have another question or you still have your hand up? It must be tired by now. Oh, Nancy, yes, hi. Thank you for being here tonight, Nancy. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you do and for that wonderful piece, the school deliberative session toolkit. It's excellent.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that folks will be able to use it and spread it widely because, it took a lot of time to put it together, so that's one reason, but also the more informed you might find folks coming to your deliberative session after seeing something like that, the less questions, the less opposition you might actually be bumping up against. But I also I just had a comment to throw out. Because I know that our friend from Springfield had said that, they were having some issues getting onto the ballot. And I just wanted to piggyback on how school funding issues are not just limited to the schools, but also that's a taxpayer issue.
Mhm.
And by having this warrant on your ballot and being able to see, how important this issue is for a local town elected official, it's also helpful for us to be able to go out and use that to be able to advocate even more so, and see the interest that is generating around that from the folks in our town, and makes me want to show up to the State House even more so as a select board member to advocate on behalf of some of the pieces of these warrant articles. It's also hard because if we're talking about Springfield right now, because we already had our school deliberative session, we can't add another warrant article onto our school district ballot right now. So that's another way to be able to say, hey, we want this on here. Also because we want to have a real understanding as to the interest of folks in town. So then our local elected officials know how they should also be helping to advocate for this on a state level or on other levels too. So
Oh,
just wanted to throw that out there too.
No, excellent points. Really appreciate it.
And that's
Megan, more?
Yes. So I think piggybacking on Nancy's point, Kathy Robinson Suter says if the Board of Selectmen decides it cannot go on a ballot, and we have passed the deadline for collecting signatures and submitting a warrant, we won't be able to move it to the school ballot, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's also important. I was going to talk about this in a moment, and this is actually for town meeting towns. The week of, February 9th, maybe February 16th or so, your town committees or your town select board are going to be meeting, and they're going to be determining what goes on the warrant or what goes on the warrant article, perhaps what order it is, and if they're going to support it. And so it's very important to look at, and oftentimes there's special meetings because it's a busy week for them, a busy time for them. So really look at your town calendar, see when the select board are meeting, take a look at the agenda and see if they're going to be going over warrant articles. If they are, you want to be there because you want to be able to speak to if they've got any objections to it, if they don't like the language, or if they need a little encouragement to support it. That's your opportunity to hear what their pushbacks may be, if they have them. And again, using some of the points we've talked about tonight and some of the great points that Nancy's brought up earlier in terms of how to say, well, yeah, it really does need to be on there, and we really would like your support.
And I have
yes,
something
Megan?
also from Eric Johnson. Eric, you had mentioned that there was a small issue with language. Did you get assistance at your local level with amending that? Some of the towns want it in the form of a question, some do not. I don't know if that was your issue, Eric, but if you'd like to come offline and ask your question.
So,
Eric?
I use the language that you guys gave me exactly. The only thing I changed on it was, I used the town of Lee
Yeah.
instead of the, town/school.
Yeah.
But I think the way you described it, Megan, was exactly it, is that they were like, well, is it just the question at the top or is it the whole thing? And I'm like, it's the whole thing. And they're like, are you sure? Because it's usually just a question. And I'm like, no, I think it's the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, and the bottom line is, again, we're going back to every town's different, and we want to make sure that, it's about the intent. And so we want to be able to say X number of towns with X number of voters from across the state want to protect the taxpayers. And so it might just be the question. Depending on, other towns, they want all the whereases and whereases. And we had a big, long debate about how short or how long should this be, because we could have had 12 whereases for a lot of this. If you did the right thing, and again, if other towns are running into that, just make sure that the intent of the issue and the question remains consistent so that we can actually use it in the unified voice. Thanks,
And Carol, if I can add to Eric, just remember, this is why it's super important that everybody stays in that room all evening long, because warrants can, though the general substance of a warrant article cannot be changed, they can be amended. So if somebody says that they want to truncate it and cut all the whereases out, but leave just the question, well, that could happen potentially. So just be paying attention, especially when we're talking about tax caps and things like that. That's really where your team needs to stay in the room and be in the room for the long haul. These discussions can go sometimes 2-3 hours, but you need to be prepared for that.
Megan, thank you. If we do have other questions, please, Megan, send them to me, or I will get back in touch with you. We've got just a few minutes left.
Great.
And we did want to keep this to 1 hour, but please, do know you can reach out to us. In conclusion, as a wrap up, town meeting and deliberative sessions rewards preparation. What you're doing right now, preparing, coordinating, and staying focused, is what moves votes. Your next step is simple. Take what we've shared tonight, prepare your team, and bring it to your deliberative session in town meeting, because this is how we get to yes. One well-prepared town at a time, creating a clear statewide message. One last thing, and it matters. You don't have to be an expert, and Leslie was talking to this. This is new to a lot of people, and again, in every town it's different, and if you have a new moderator, it might be different. So town meeting and deliberative sessions work because everyday voters show up prepared and speak with clarity and purpose. Preparation matters more than perfection, and that's how votes move. That's how change happens. The next slide, Katie. So reach out to us, keep us in the loop. We're here to help you get over the finish line. And just really want to say thank you for doing this work and for being part of Warrants Work New Hampshire. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. Be in touch. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.